Welcome to the podcast, Kamina. You're here today with me. I'm Stephanie Voss, and I'm here with Susan Cooper, who has another really interesting interview that I'm looking forward to hearing. Tell us about it, Susan.
Well, thank you. And it is great to be here. Hard to believe it's been a whole month has gone by. Well, today, you and the other listeners are going to have an opportunity to hear my interview with Cieren Saadeh, who is a professor at Prescott College. And the reason why I'm excited about this particular interview is I had a chance to talk to her about her job and what she's doing out at the college and the impact on Prescott. But this also will help us sort of refute that myth that immigrants are not necessarily involved in professions that require high levels of education and training. Now, keep in mind, Cieren is not a foreign-born immigrant. She is first generation. But again, she will help us explore that particular assumption.
I know she does a lot of interesting work here in Prescott and at the college, and we'll find out about how her background influenced that. Thanks.
Okay, let's take a listen. Hello, I'm here with Kamina. This is Susan Cooper, and I have a very special guest today, Dr. Cieren Saadeh. And she is a community journalist, community organizer, as well as community teacher. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me this morning. I am super excited to be speaking with you. I'm pretty new to Prescott, so.
But now you received your degree here, correct? So was that from afar or?
So I had visited Prescott every 4 months for the better part of 13 years. So I'd been here for anywhere from a week to 2 months at a time between teaching and being a student. And then I moved here about a year ago.
Well, then welcome not only to Kamina, but welcome to Prescott, even though it's been intermittent.
Mm-hmm.
So what I have found with our past individuals that we've interviewed, so much of the work that they're doing currently has a lot to do with their upbringing. So I'm curious to find out a little bit more about your background. And first of all, where did you grow up?
So I was born in Michigan, outside of Detroit. Spent several years outside of Chicago, and in Chicago with my family. And then we moved to Minnesota, to St. Paul, when I was around 7 or 8, somewhere in there. And I lived there until last year. So I am Midwestern born and bred. I love the Midwest. I like snow and cold weather and tater tot casserole and hot dish and all the rest of it.
Well, good. I know we definitely have snow here, but this year is not the year, apparently. Mm-hmm. So I hope you're adapting.
Yeah, I was in Minnesota 2 weekends ago for the blizzard, so I was quite happy.
Okay, so you grew up in the Midwest. Now, your parents, they're not from the United States.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your childhood experience maybe was unique because of that influence.
Yeah. So my parents my whole family is from a small village in Jordan called Fahis. My mom's side of the family is part Jordanian, part Palestinian. My grandfather had left Palestine during the Nakba in the 1940s. To Jordan. He was in the military. He moved with my mom and his other children and my grandmother to the States in the 1970s. So, they moved to Michigan. They settled there. My dad moved to the States right before he got married to my mom, and I was born just a year later. What we know about the family history is that my paternal grandfather's side of the family has been in this village for about 10 generations so far as we know. We found out through a British historian who had visited, and I found out from my uncle, who's a cardiologist in Kingman, that we can track the family history at least 10 from my grandfather up. So it's 12 generations total in the village, and we still have land there. We still have a house there. My grandmother's moved back there actually a few years ago just because it's a little healthier for her. So I grew up in a community. My father was one of the first of his siblings to move to the States. He really wanted to not necessarily assimilate, but he owned gas stations. He was trying to learn English. That was a big part of his story. So unlike most of my younger cousins, my brother and I did not grow up speaking Arabic. There was 4 men older than us, but they were born in the Middle East, not just in Jordan, but a few other places. But I'm the oldest female on my dad's side of the grandchildren, and so I didn't grow up speaking Arabic because for my father, it was really important to learn English, and that had to happen at home. I know that I spoke Arabic until preschool kindergarten, because I remember my mom telling me a story of one of the nuns I needed, her help with something, and I couldn't communicate it in English. I knew a lot of English, but there was just some things that I'd only ever said in Arabic, but that was gone pretty quickly once you're in an American school learning English. So we always grew up really close to the culture. Like I said, we still have a home there. My uncles live there. My grandmother's there. I was there last summer. But being Jordanian primarily has really shaped a lot of how I was raised. I think I am very much somebody who grew up in the cross-cultural space. So there's a lot of kind of Western American about who I am. And then there's a lot of influence in how I operate in the world. So I think my sense of hospitality comes from being Jordanian and how I welcome people into my home, for example.
You mentioned the fact that you have both the Western influence as well as the Jordanian. Do you feel it's ever more of a push and pull, or it's a blend? Or maybe at times it's a blend and sometimes it's a push and pull?
I think both, yeah. There can be a push and pull sometimes. I'm, like I said, the oldest granddaughter, so a lot of the freedoms my younger cousins get, they did it. But for me, my parents were so, by the time I was a teenager, they didn't want to lose the cultural pieces, so they held on a little bit more tightly. I don't think anything negative happened from that necessarily, but there was definitely a push and pull there. But yeah, again, I think there's some of a blend. I'm going to invite people over to my home. I'm going to serve them food, but I'm going to be cooking American food primarily. I'm not going to be cooking more Western food. I'm not really going to be cooking Arabic food as much. I do like to cook it, but it's just not my number one thing, So it's a bit of a blend as well.
Okay. Tell me, is there anything in particular that you really value from your upbringing, knowing that it was different than maybe your neighbors?
I will say there's a connection to place that's really interesting. When my brother and I, when we were little, we used to go to our village. We used to walk from my mom's house. We actually call my grandmother Mom. So we used to walk from Mom's house down to my uncle's house, which is my paternal grandfather's home. So we used to walk through the village. We used to stop at uncle's houses, great uncle's houses. We used to go past the chicken butcher and the salon that everybody went to. This at the time was a smaller village, no McDonald's, no Starbucks, no nothing. It was, 2,000 people, and we were basically related to everybody by birth or by marriage. The whole family was there. It's different now. We've had a lot of refugee populations and a lot of expats from the West come to the village and settle there. So we have a Papa John's now and a McDonald's and a lot of other places. So it's changed a lot since we were little, but that connection to place is so strong. The fact that my uncles purchased my great-grandfather's land that he had had to sell, and they turned it into a nature preserve. And they grow everything for their pizza restaurants, and they have acres and acres of olive tree groves. It's just incredible. I actually have some of their olive oil in my house here in Prescott. That connection to place is so strong, and it influences how I see my connection to place wherever I travel, because I always recognize that these places are made up of histories and people and communities who came here before me. So it's definitely had a huge impact on how I see my own place in the world, because even if I have that push and pull, I can never forget the fact that I've been lucky enough to walk the land where my great-grandfather once walked.
That was really interesting. I mean, to hear the impression and the impact that history has had on you, which those who have lived here multiple generations are not going to have that same experience. And that kind of actually leads me to the next question, which is, how do you think that background influences who you are as a journalist and what you bring to your journalism?
So, have been lucky enough to do reporting related to food justice, land use, transit, small business, legislative reporting over the past 20 years. I had an office out of the state capitol in Minnesota for over a decade, working with local organizations. I have covered more press conferences out of the Capitol in my life than anybody else in my field, that community journalism field. I think as somebody who's worked a lot with immigrant communities in the Twin Cities and who did a lot of work as both a community organizer and a community journalist, one of the things that I've learned is that people are so much more than just the press release. And a lot of my reporting is around trying to bring context and connection to the stories that we tell. One of the things that I've challenged a lot of folks in my field to think about is we often prioritize organizations and movements. I don't consider myself a movement reporter. I am not. I'm a community journalist. I want to know about what people in a shared space or a shared identity group think about the conditions under which they live and how they're responding to that. And I try and share that out there. That is very different from movement reporting, which would focus on the campaign. And I will mention that. Of course, I'll mention that. It would be irresponsible not to. But I'm looking at the broader, more contextualized communities and trying to communicate that story through whatever medium I've chosen, which is most often print, but is occasionally podcast.
Okay. And that actually, in a way, you kind of answered the next question, unless you have more to add. What's the distinction between traditional journalism and community journalism? And why do you think community journalism is so important right now?
Yeah. So your traditional mainstream legacy reporting, you're looking at your statewide dailies. These are people who, they might come from a place, but part of their tradition is staying disconnected from place. That doesn't necessarily mean parachuting in. Often these people have deep relationship and community. But what has to come across on the page has to be a sense of distance. I won't say disconnection, but distance, right? That value of objectivity is very crucial, right? Neutrality. Community journalism is different because who we're accountable is different. In a daily, for example, or even public radio, you're accountable to your audience. You're accountable to the principles and values of journalism. You're accountable to an institution of journalism, not just an organization, but like the institution. In community journalism, we're accountable to the community as a whole, whether or not you're reading the newspaper that we're putting out there. When I worked at North News, which is a paper in North Minneapolis, I was a small business and education reporter. This was my first ever staff reporter job. I think North News is the best of the best. It's an organization I'm so proud to have been affiliated with. North Minneapolis is a predominantly Black and brown community. This is a community that has been historically kind of, excuse my language, screwed over by legacy reporting. Often people would focus on violence or crime in the reporting. And what we did was we really specifically didn't talk about crime. There was other places people could get that news. We highlighted teachers, we highlighted small businesses, we talked about businesses that had shut down, we had talked about the social fabric and where it was fraying. We put out classifieds every month that listed all the jobs available in a community because most of the people didn't have in-home broadband internet access. Jobs, events, any place where community could get built. I hated it at the time. It was tough because you had to put it together, and it took me the better part of 12 hours, usually, between writing and fact-checking and finding everything. But looking back, I think it's probably one of the most important things. I went into North News thinking that you have your big stories and you have your little stories, and all of them are important, but big stories are big stories and little stories are little stories. I was very wrong. What I learned very quickly was the little stories that I would have called them, so streaming a kindergarten choir concert on social media. Those were really important to people. They never felt small. People wanted us to do that because they wanted to send it to their grandparents. They were just as important as the big reporting we did about vacant schools that had been sitting empty for years by the public school system. All of those were important, but they were important in really different ways. So community journalism is accountable to community. We used to do community-based fact-checking. We were never the experts. In a lot of journalism, journalists get to think they're the experts of at least their craft. In community journalism, we do not get to say we're the experts of our craft. We are members of a community, and that community as a whole gets to come together and share that expertise through, hey, Susan, I'm working on this story. I want to confirm the quote. And also, can we confirm a few of these details right now? I want to make sure I got this right. Oh, okay, I missed this. Let's get some context. Let me go back through this again and come back to you with an updated version. That process of being accountable to our community in the reporting meant that we had trust and people could find us in the community. Kenzie O'Keefe, my boss at the time, and I used to work from a coffee shop called Sammy's Avenue Eatery. And we'd wear our North News t-shirts. And we knew if we were working from there that we probably weren't going to get a lot of work done because people would come into Sammy's and they talked about the last issue and they'd pitch stories for a future issue. And we had a connection with people. They knew where to find us and they knew how to work with us. And as a small business reporter, even though I didn't live in the North Side, my grocery store, my laundromat, my dry cleaner, my garage, everything I did was in North Minneapolis. I wrote my dissertation in North Minneapolis. Kenzie taught at one of the high schools. I taught at the other high school. It was just part of the nature of our work was we had to be present and part of that place. And community journalism is different because it is deeply present and deeply accountable to people that you can literally see them in the grocery store. And that meant we couldn't drop the ball.
So are there examples of community journalism here in Prescott?
So I can't necessarily answer that yet because I'm still trying to figure out some of it. I think there is the beginnings of some. I know of at least one project that's going to be launching in June that aims to be community-oriented around trying to create shared dialogue spaces around some of the issues that we face as a community, reaching across political divides. I think that could be community journalism, but the project isn't live yet. I've been in touch and been speaking with some of the folks at the Courier. The Courier is one of the dailies, right? It's one of the groups that's out there doing the news. They're not necessarily community journalism, but that doesn't mean they don't have a role, right? I've heard of the Prescott Times, but I've only seen a Facebook page for it, and I don't know if it's journalism so much as it's people trying to create counter-narrative around some of the news. So I'm still trying to get my wits about me. I will say I'm working on a pretty cool research project right now related to this. Because a lot of my background's in food systems work and food justice organizing, one of the things that I'm doing, I'm actually speaking about it at a conference this summer, is can we build sustainable community journalism ecosystems in local communities based off of how we think local food systems can get built and sustained? So a distributor, like what would be the journalistic equivalent of a farmer's market, or just a journalistic equivalent of seed sharing, or a journalistic equivalent of a grocery store, right? Or any of these different things. And then creating a map that actually connects the two and that actually says like, hey, this is how we can start investing in places like Prescott, Arizona, and making sure community has the depth of journalistic knowledge and information that they need.
Okay. Well,
I think Camina is a pretty close community journalism project, to be honest.
Well, as I was listening to you, I think I was kind of thinking that. I go, oh, maybe that's what I'm doing.
I would think it is. I mean, the profiles that you do, the shared community, helping people in the community. I mean, this is probably the most community journalism-based project that I've seen in Prescott.
Well, that makes me feel pretty good. I'll have to make sure I share that with my podcast host.
Please.
All right. So leading to my next question, so you are an associate professor at Prescott College. You received your PhD from them, and you're now giving back, and you're teaching. Describe the two programs.
So I actually made full faculty this year.
Oh, yay.
I just never remembered to update any of the different spaces online that talk about me. So I am the department director for the undergraduate on-campus critical social justice and solidarity program, as well as the online organizing and community justice program. I had to take that slow because we just renamed the programs and I still get confused a little bit. My boss might have comments to me about that when they hear this. I love the work that we do in our programs. We teach our students to be community leaders and community organizers. So whether it's ensuring our students have the skills to go out and impact and influence community change, we've had students go out and work with unions, with political organizations, with community organizations, with youth-led organizations in schools. I've had about half my students across both programs work in K-12, right? They want to take this and they want to teach younger people how to also influence change. We've had students undercover in both Amazon facilities and the Starbucks trying to influence and impact the union organizing happening in both of those communities. My students work and learn about the systems that influence all of the lives we get to live. And they also learn how to influence and build better and more equitable systems. This means my students can work in outdoor spaces, experiential nature-based systems, but they could also work at a local grocery store. And no matter where they are, they see the systems and they start working towards influence that. I have a student who's actually doing a really cool play for their senior project this semester. The student is using a play that I recall when it came out. It was released on YouTube. And she's using it to talk about about Prescott and Prescott College as a whole, and to think about how systems impact us at the most local level. One of the activities I love having my students do in one of my classes is look at old maps of Prescott from 1900 and 1950 and then 2000. And they look at these old maps and how those maps help us understand the history of the place, whose history gets told. Like we used to have a bustling Chinatown in Prescott, right, where Whiskey Row is. When the Great Fire happened, there was a Chinatown right in that area. But if you don't look at the old maps, you would never know that we've had this historic immigrant wave through Prescott. So they look at these maps and they study the history of this place and they get to understand it. They work with lawyers out of the University of Minnesota Mapping Prejudice Project, where they actually look at housing deeds, and they help find where racial covenants that would have banned housing for any number of non-white communities in those deeds, and they actually track the language and they send it to lawyers, and lawyers are working with the people who own those homes in a number of states and communities to help get those racial covenants negated from their deeds. Obviously, they're no longer legally enforced, but just getting them out of the deeds still matters. My students get to work on that project. They get to be part of this work. They study supply chains. Trader Joe's Blueberries. They track that. The company that Trader Joe's Blueberries, they own the company that makes the plastic. The company that they own the farms. They own the entire distribution chain. They also did a Samsung phone. They tracked every piece of a Samsung Android phone. Every piece of it. How it gets from the mine all the way to the consumer. Every chip, the glass, everything. They see systems, they know how to interrogate those systems, and they know how to make sense of those systems. And that allows them to go out into the world and then work in systems-oriented work to make change.
So it sounds like you have students like working across the country, even globally.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of your students, my understanding is they're online, although you do have students face-to-face.
About half and half.
Yeah, half and half. So you did mention one project as far as them studying the maps in Prescott. Any other projects in particular that they're engaged in Prescott?
Yeah. So I have one student. They're doing some really cool work studying the history of social justice organizing in Prescott, Arizona, and mapping that because our program has had a lot of influence in that arena. So they're actually mapping this 30, 40-year history of social justice organizing in Prescott. One of my students is leading a committee of folks who are really wanting to talk about food justice in the local community. And I will tell you, one of the things we're thinking about for next year is potentially bringing a farmer's market to campus, maybe once a month. We're still in discussion. I haven't even brought it to the bosses yet, but it's something that we're really thinking about. Our students, these are not my students. These are students from a different department at the campus. So I want to give credit to Eleanor Tyson and some of the folks with the sustainability crew. I rent a property across the street from campus, and I have about 8 raised garden beds. I don't have a gardening background. My grandmother is an amazing gardener, but that's just not where I excel. These students actually work through their work study with folks across Prescott, helping them with their gardens and getting their gardens healthy. And they helped me, and they came over and they helped me pull weeds, and they helped me know what not to pull and what I could do with my garden beds and how the health of the soil was and how to get the compost back to alive. It's really powerful to see my students being the teachers in this space. We're also planning a number of events, including a bread making workshop. I do a lot of mutual aid work, and one of my students is going to be doing a sourdough bread making workshop available to anybody on campus. Anybody can come together. We have a block party being held April 25th that students are helping to organize on campus. It's just a get to know your neighbor thing, 1 to 4 p.m., April 25th. I've taught at a lot of colleges, and this is the first college I've ever taught at that is so deeply embedded in the community that the college is really indecipherable from the community around it.
Well, that is, it's impressive to see the impact and the variety of projects that the students have found themselves engaged in. So, I mean, what would your vision be for your students regarding the Prescott? Maybe things that you've been thinking about that you'd like to see happen. I know you kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah. My students are so deeply embedded in this community. I think I would love for folks to know what the influence of my institution has been. And with nothing regarding my work, it's really just when we're talking about students who are supporting various writing and arts projects, we're talking about folks who are embedded in a place. They are here, part of this community. And I think it's very easy to think about college students of any community as they'll be gone in 4 years. My students make the most of their 4 years in Prescott, and so many of our students stay in town, and they work with nonprofits, and they work with community organizations, and they work with schools. And I really want people to know that, our students, I am so lucky to be their teacher. I get to learn from my students every single day about how to operate in the world. I learn about how to be a better organizer, a better teacher, a better journalist. I see how creative they are. I haven't written a poem in 25 years, but it was some of our students who inspired me to write a poem this year about what's going on in Minneapolis. These are people whom they make all of us better, even when they challenge us in ways that can be uncomfortable.
It's impressive not only what your students are doing, but everything that you have brought to this community and are bringing to this community. And it's been interesting talking to you because of not only what you're bringing, but how your background, your rich background, and your ties to Jordan and your family, how all of that is just sort of intertwined and brought you to this point. So at this point, I'm going to do a quick little deviation and talk about a little fun project of yours, and we'll close with that. Yeah. If you'd like to share with our listeners about your, let me see if I get this right, the Peas and Justice Prescott Community Cookbook.
Yeah.
I want to share a little bit about that.
So last year at the social justice residencies, we were sitting at one of the local Indian restaurants in town and up on Montezuma. And we were sitting there for the shared meal after night one. And this idea of let's feed our students had really come out of the conversation. And it was informal, it was casual, it was the end of the first long day of the residency. So all of us were sort of jokey and sitting there. And we had said, let's publish a cookbook. Now, we could have waited, gone through the next year, done a lot of planning, tried to find funding, or I could use my kitchen and just collect recipes from the community and cook them all and take photos and just get an imperfect edition one out. And that's what we did. So we have a deeply imperfect edition one you can find on our website if you just look up Peas and Justice Prescott College Community Cookbook. These are recipes from across our field stations, across our campus. For folks who are really into camping, we have a lot of different field recipes over a campfire. We have a lot of soups. Prescott College is really known for its commitment to soup. So every Wednesday from noon to 1, we have a free soup lunch open to anybody in the community. These are from 12 to 1. It's every Wednesday. Well, most Wednesdays of the school semester, you can just call. It's a really cool process. People come for soup. And then on Friday from 12 to 1, again, you would have to call, but our sustainability crew does a soup lunch, and it's cooked by students, and they cook it all together. I loved working on that cookbook. I think it's my favorite project I've done for the college in my time there, and we're actually working on the second edition right now. We're really expanding the kinds of recipes, so we're doing a lot of mutual aid recipes, like how to cook soup for 200 people, right? Or a lot of baked good recipes. I'm really enjoying the photography aspect of it. I didn't realize before the first edition that I loved food photography, but turns out I really do. Our students are so supportive. I was speaking with a student recently. They were saying, hey, I'd love to do some cooking with you. And so we were thinking about a weekend potluck available for anybody in community. I shared that with one of my coworkers yesterday, and they said, what if we do a brunch potluck on the weekend? Everybody in the community is welcome to join. You don't have to bring something, but if you want, you can, and we can do this together. So shared meals and that sense of hospitality is really crucial to who we are as an institution. And the cookbook felt like one way of documenting part of that story. They have a bunch of dorm-friendly recipes. Here are recipes you can cook in your dorms. And this next edition will have things like how to make homemade butter, how to make homemade bread, how to make homemade vanilla extract, things that actually helps, create a more sustainable kitchen.
Well, thank you for a delicious ending to this interview. I think not only for myself, but hopefully the listeners are going to feel that they really have a better understanding of a little bit about your background and how it influenced where you are today, but the importance of community journalism, especially to marginalized communities. I think we've all learned a little bit more, too, about your cookbook and activities over at Prescott College, and hopefully you'll have some new visitors over there as well.
We hope so.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Stephanie, what did you think?
Susan, you've done it again. I'm thinking about things in a way that I hadn't thought about them before. And the thing that struck me the most about Dr. Saadeh's experiences is that I would have thought that people who moved from one country to another, I guess I'd thought of them as rootless and as not having strong ties to a place. And the idea that I got from her is that having been to a place where people have lived for generation upon generation makes one even more aware of the importance of putting roots down and of planting yourself in a place, and other gardening metaphors that seem to be coming to mind. She used the word community and has made her life about community in a way that really moved me.
Well, I totally agree with you. I was really taken by her commitment to take that experience as a child of understanding her background and her history and bringing it to Prescott and with her students. I mean, she has integrated it into so many aspects of her life. And I was really appreciative of being able to have a chance to talk to her and have her share those ideas with me.
Thanks. I also learned a little bit more about Prescott, both about its history and the activities of the college. And just as an aside, if you want to visit our website, www.podcastcamina.com, we're including in our resources page a link to one of those maps she was talking about that shows the history of Prescott and the fact that there was a Chinatown, which is astonishing to me. I didn't realize that.
That was news to me as well. Again, there were a number of different aspects and items that she talked about that I was totally unaware. So it was a good learning experience, I think, for me, and sounds like for you too.
Thanks. And I think you wanted to also mention that we're going to include a link to that cookbook.
Yeah, The Peas in Justice. You are correct.
So if you want to find out more about that, check out the website. And now that brings us to the part of the episode that we like to call Two Facts and an Act. And what's the first fact, Susan?
Okay, so I did gather a few facts having to do with what our assumption was at the beginning. How many foreign-born laborers are actually involved in professions that require higher levels of training and education. And what the Census Bureau tells us is 18% of foreign-born workers are involved in education and healthcare, while another 15.4% are involved in professional and business services. So you're talking about close to a third of those individuals. And it doesn't include individuals like Cieren, who are really actually first generation. So she wouldn't even be included in those numbers. Now, specifically when it comes to education, we find that 11% of teachers are involved in education, and actually at the post-secondary level, 22% are involved in higher education as well.
Well, that really puts a different shade on the picture I think we have of immigrants and their families being the people who do the grunt work and only work in farms and cleaning and things like that. That's a lot of professionals. And I'm particularly moved by hearing the information about the educators, because those figures are from a couple of years ago, as all our statistics tend to be. And I worry a little bit about what's going to happen when people are less willing to come to the United States for fear of having to leave again, or less able to come because of the limits we're placing on immigration and even on visas for temporary purposes. So it's a little worrying to me.
And I agree with you, especially in the area of education where we're already having problems with teacher shortages. But it's not only the numbers, it's I think that these individuals bring that rich background. It's sort of a global perspective, bringing that into the classroom, how important that is. Because one of the things that educators try to do is to help students become critical thinkers and being able to look at things from a more global perspective. In other words, when it comes to problem solving, can they look at it from different perspectives? And I think that when we have educators that are foreign-born, or even in, again, Cieren's case where she's first generation, she can bring that into the classroom.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's important. Which brings us, I think, to the next part of our episode, the act. And what would that be for today?
The act is pretty simple. Thank a teacher.
That sounds easy.
Especially if you know that they bring that history with them, either as a foreign-born teacher or even first generation.
Well, there you go. Thank a teacher. And we hope you've enjoyed listening to Cieren Saadeh. And we want really to invite you into the part of Prescott, into the part of northern Arizona, into the part of the United States that is open to new perspectives. And we value yours as well. So let us know what you think.
Yes, and definitely visit our website. You can listen to current and past episodes and even do a little binge listening if you want. And then also make sure that you add comments to keep the conversation going, because we do want to hear from you, and requests being placed on our email list so we can also remind you as each new episode is aired.
A place where contradictions meet. Deserts of sand, mountains of snow. To make it our home, there's a long way to go.